Welcome to the Lost Signals Discusses Film and TV. Using the revolutionary Manzor-Amosi Thurlow scale,
or MONS,
we scrupulously review these art forms with an emphasis on narrative structure. Join us for another entertaining episode. Hello, and welcome back to the Lost Signals Reviews Film and TV. Today we are going to be reviewing a film by Akira Kurosawa called Rashomon, a classic that I think we have all been kind of looking forward to. I guess, Scott, you've seen this before.
I'll tell you, but yeah, so technically I have seen this movie before, but I forgot that I'd seen it because it was a very early film class now 15 years ago or so.
We might chat about that a little bit, but yeah. Anyway, I have seen it before. I am your host, Steve Ramosi, and I am joined today by Chris Morgan.
Good evening.
And Scott Thurlow.
Rochambeau.
And Chris, why don't you give us a funny luck line?
4 characters in search of a lie.
Indeed.
Indeed. All right, well, I'm going to start off with the plot of this story, and it's a fairly straightforward plot told 4 different ways and in 4 very different ways. So the basic idea is that there is a rape and a murder that I guess a tribunal or like the court is trying to figure out in this town that it's set in, and there are a couple of characters that have convened after the trial to talk about what they've seen and kind of go over the darkness of what they have witnessed and experienced. So throughout the course of the movie, they talk about the 4 different stories that are told by 4 different people and how completely different they are from each other and kind of that type of thing. And basically, it's told in the order of the bandit tells his story first, and he's kind of like a swashbuckling hero almost.
Is he a hero, though?
Well, in his own mind. You know, or I guess, like, actually, that's a thing we'll get to later, but, like, he's kind of a scumbag even in his own story. But he kind of tells a story that the woman loved, like immediately fell in love with him and chose to be with him. And then it's told by the lady herself who is involved, the wife of, I guess, this guy who's supposed to be a samurai.
The wife of the murdered man / samurai.
Yeah, and, you know, she tells her own story of being raped, and then she like passes out and then wakes up to her husband murdered. The next story is by the dead man himself through the eyes of a medium, and the bandit kind of rapes her and then runs away, and then he kills himself. And then the final story is by a woodcutter who supposedly has seen the whole thing. And this kind of seems like the closest to the truth, and involves this kind of lengthy sword fight. And as you get through all of them, as you get to the end, you kind of realize that you're not really sure
about any of it,
if anything that they've said is true, and you don't really kind of know what the whole story is. And like, this is kind of, I guess this is one of the first. Probably not one of the first, but like one of the big codifiers of the unreliable narrator story, especially in film. And I don't know. I think I'm just gonna open it up because I have my own thoughts. We've talked a little bit off camera about this, but I'm gonna open it up to you guys first before I give my more in-depth thoughts of like what I thought of the plot. But that's kind of the basis of the plot.
Yeah, so like you said, or as you asked me, yes, I have seen this film before. I have seen Rashomon, but I forgot that I had seen it. but after I was like looking up stuff about it, and like, okay, yes, I remember this. So, what the other work that sort of came to mind as I did that was we covered it as a short story was an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. Sort of, It's not quite a 1-to ratio, but if we're going to talk about the plot, like yes, as you described, it's basically 4 people telling their version of an event, and in the wake of it, like sometimes they're jarringly contradictory.
Yeah.
And possibly a lot of this will go into themes, but like it's basically a framework device unto itself to explore like some character stuff that we'll get to in a bit as well. But as a general framework, and it is also based on a short story from like 30 years earlier, I believe, like roughly something like that, if I remember correctly. So like just as a narrative itself, I'm gonna say like it's a fine framework, and it serves the point to explore some of the stuff as we'll talk out. So I'm probably looking at like a pretty solid 2. It certainly is not weak, but it's not like the most like in-depth complex thing ever. And while that does not necessarily make it like, it doesn't have to be complex to be a perfect 3 plot or anything. I just think like it's there as sort of like I said, like a prop, like skeleton in which to drape over some more interesting, perhaps philosophical and humanistic elements.
Right.
So that's why I'm probably looking at a 2. And now you guys can tell me what you think.
A film like this is kind of interesting to discuss from a narrative standpoint. When you've got 4 stories, unreliable narrator, at what point is the beginning, middle, and end of the story? Because you're always intercut with different stories.
Yeah.
So judging this narratively, if I could give it a 2.5, I would, but I'll probably I'll probably fall on a 2. And it's not to the detriment of the film. I'm just once again, saying we're looking at it narratively speaking.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of what I have to say is going to go into themes and style. I just wanted to say that this was based on a short story called In a Grove.
Yes, that's what it was.
By Rainosake I forget it.
That's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, I'm. There's no way I can pronounce it, but it's called. It's based on a short story called In a Grove.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that the plot of this is it's a story that had my attention more at the end than it did in the beginning. I think, just because I liked the final story because it brought together a lot of the disparate parts. Or like the parts that I was like, like what the hell are they doing with this? And it's a story that hinges on 2 plot points. There's the rape of the woman and the murder of the man. And a lot of the nuance that goes into this plot is about how all the characters deal with the 3 basically characters deal with their disparate parts of like what's going on. As you guys mentioned, it's not like a super complex plot, but it is done 4 different times, 4 different ways, and I'll give them a bit of credit for that. I'm probably going to side on a 2 as well. There were certain things that I was like, I didn't understand completely. Like, why are these characters seemingly trying to make themselves look bad in their own stories and things like that? But in terms of kind of what it did plot-wise, I don't think that it did anything poorly, super poorly. It just wasn't up to the standards. It wasn't up to the highest standards in the world, I guess I'll say. So I'm going to give it a 2, probably a little bit of a weaker 2 than you guys, but it's a 2's a 2.
Sure. I mean, like I said, like my final thought, I guess, on plot is like, I feel like it seems to me to make sense to give it such a score, like given for what it is and what it does.
Yeah.
Right. It sort of lies somewhat in the middle of the road ish. But again, I think a lot of the stronger points are about to come up, in fact, in the next question.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah.
Again, we're judging this from a narrative standpoint. In a film like this, it's kind of, because there is no ABC direct correlation, it's a little more difficult.
Yeah. And I will say that's not the only detriment that I found in the plot, but there were other points that weren't like, there were parts of this movie where I was like, meh, whatever. And there were parts of it I was like, oh, I really enjoyed that. But like, overall it's going to be a 2. And let's move on to I think, the more interesting question, which is the question of theme. And Chris, why don't you get us started?
Okay, I'm gonna say the theme of this film is the faith and frailty of human beings. The reason I'm saying that is because it starts off with the woodcutter and the priest, and they're taking refuge in the Rashomon temple. Right?
Yes.
And it's raining, and a commoner comes by, and the woodcutter and the priest are lamenting, and basically the commoner comes by and starts a fire. Everybody's sheltering from the rain, and they basically start telling him, about the woodcutter starts telling about how he found the body, and slow. Basically, what you do is it pops you in the middle of the scene and throws a bunch of puzzle pieces on the floor, and they never once tell you exactly how the pieces are supposed to fit together. But thematically, the way each person's take on the story is, and this is why I really kind of wish I had watched it last weekend, again, because I really would like to go back knowing what I know now and look at everybody's stories. The priest has faith in humanity. The woodcutter wants to have faith, and in the end, it turns out there's an issue of this missing knife at the crime scene, and it turns out that the woodcutter basically took it, sold it, and then they found this crying baby, and the woodcutter's like, I have 6 kids, and the priest, so I'll take the baby. One more is not going to make a difference, and the priest is all of a sudden turns from being angry at this guy to praising this guy. Meaning, all right, this guy turned out to be wasn't what he thought he was. He turned out that there was a thief inside of him, but it was the whole nobility effort. What I'm saying is this is a story about people basically grasping at straws, looking for faith in humanity. The people that are telling the story, there's always a different take on the story. And I really would like to watch it again to see, what everybody's motive is going into it. Each story, because we all talked about it. Nobody really came out looking pristine from this. They all had their frailties that they basically admitted to. They showed strength in different ways. So this really thematically, it's one of those things where I really want to see it again, because there's obviously a lot of attention to detail, and a lot of this is, that all safer style. But for a film that has such a simplistic plot, delving into the variations of the different men having faith in, society, in humanity, and then knowing something, and then, well, not everything is how it appears. So, and there is, things to validate, somebody's faith, and things to, put on display people's frailties. I thought they did all these things really well. I'm not really articulating it as much as easily as I could, because I think the more I'm talking about, the more I'm realizing, shit, there's a lot to unpack here. So I'm going to stop talking and say this is getting a very strong one, and it is definitely something I'm looking forward to seeing again.
Sure. That's a good point. Perhaps it lends itself to repeat viewings, to sort of delve into a bit more, and having seen it once, etc. But I'm going to go with my old, not necessarily the duality of man, but the duplicity of man, if you will. And yeah, of course, because of the framework and because of the nature of it, you're getting 4 different variations of a traumatic event. And the whole point is that you're not supposed to be sure, what parts of them are accurate and true, and why they sort of clash to get against each other. I think that's it was an exploration of that. And there was even I mentioned this during the viewing, that while again not I'm not saying it's a one-to-one relation, but there's hints, bits and pieces of sort of a Bergman-ish kind of thing, where there's some philosophy thrown in, where who knows why do people do whatever anything they do, right? You're never sure. So Steve, what you're saying, it seems as if some of the characters made themselves intentionally look worse, or look like they're
right. You're on trial,
yeah,
making yourself a murderer and a rapist,
sure.
Right?
And the interesting thing is this is a known psychological thing as well, where two or more people, multiple people, can recall the same event differently, and have wildly differing accounts of it. It's it's even sort of perhaps more pertinent that this is also framed through like sort of a court trial, because that's a known thing in real trials in real life when witnesses testify and like the testimonies are completely different, like from the same, ostensibly the same event that they're witnessing. So I think it's all that, like, it's your perception of reality, or like, you know, like how you perceive events versus like the quote unquote reality of others. And it's all like very nicely woven in through each of the 4 characters' tales. And yeah, like you sort of get more crumbs and bits and pieces of it, but the whole point is it's still like never explained what is the true, like what actually happened. Right. And I think that's the whole part of it. And like that is one of the main, if not the main theme to me at least. And yeah, there's a lot of nuances to it, as you mentioned, for sure. But I think it's very strongly like that's the strength of this film, at least one of them. And I'm going to give it a very strong 1 on that front. Yeah,
I do think that is the main point of this is to talk about how no one's reality really lines up with each other's. And that's for sure a great starting point and done. I think that point really hits home in this movie. I would say that it seems almost exaggerated how different the stories are in this, probably for effect, right? But to me, I think it would have been just as good. And I'm gonna give themes a 1. Don't get me wrong, but like I want to kind of try and maybe nitpick a little bit. But like to me, it would have been just as good or better if those stories were a bit closer together in the main points and perhaps more different in the details, because it seems like those stories wouldn't be quite so far apart if everyone was actually like in good faith telling their version of it. I get what you mean. Yeah. Now, granted, not necessarily everyone is telling their version of it in good faith in terms of this trial, but if they weren't telling their stories in good faith, I feel like they would have tried to make themselves look better. I guess that's my whole... And now that I've kind of reasoned it out with myself, that's my whole argument, is like, if you take these stories as like good faith tellings of their side of the story, then that's fine, but they should be a bit closer together. And if you take them as not good faith and they're trying to save themselves, then they should have made themselves look better.
Yeah, but in a way, all the stories were a little closer together. It's just a matter of, because there's certain details that are always the same. You know, the woman was raped.
There's 2 details that are always the same.
Right, to be redundant, the devil is in the details. Yeah. It's like, at what point, what did the woman say? Why did she want to kill her husband? Did she want the thief? Did she want the bandit, or did she want her husband? It's really funny because the gray area lies in the motive of each person telling the story, which I think on the one hand should be given. But on the other hand, I think that's part of the whole thing, is like, you look at it and it's like, well, nobody's going to come out looking great. So in what story can, like, the thief makes himself like the thief talks about how the woman wanted him.
Right.
And he just walked away, and, you know, there was all this bravado. The woman basically want to take possession of the rape and say, like, you know, hey, you know, kill my husband or kill me, or whatever she said. You know, you guys kill each other. And then, you know, there's the medium, which I like about this is they prove the medium is bullshit, because hers was her story was the most
removed from quote reality.
And then you've got the woodcutters. What I'm saying is which is why I don't think the details were as far apart. It's just a matter of, I think Kurosawa was reflecting on the motive of each of the storyteller, so to speak.
Yeah,
sure. I mean, I don't disagree with that.
I agree with that, but like. Yeah, I don't think that's mutually exclusive from what I was talking about by any means. But yeah, in terms of the theme, I guess we've gone a little bit afield. But like in terms of the themes that are displayed here and the frailty of humanity, the like the kind of redemption at the end. I don't know if I liked it or not for a film that's so focused on like the shittiness of
The
humans
darkness
and
of
like
humanity.
how much. I mean, I guess it's trying to say like it can't rain all the time. All of the crow, like it's kind of like now you can see like kind of a bit of light about humanity or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna give the themes a 1. I liked what he did with it. But as I said, I had my nitpicks and whatever. But overall, I thought that it was a well done thematic kind of quadruple retelling of the same story, and I liked that a lot too, like kind of how he showed that all 4 of those stories were completely different, but could still hinge on the same 2, big parts of them, big acts,
Sure. I'll say this as a closing thought on themes. The fact that you can probably have a very deep discussion specifically about it, as we sort of did, and probably can go on further, is credence to the fact that it's very, it's very dense thematically, and you can get a lot out of it.
Yeah.
And I think it was all well handled.
And I didn't even touch that
Regardless of your
last scene
interpretation.
between the woodcutter, the commoner, the priest, and the baby, because I'm like, wow, that's a whole nother baggage of luggage to unpack.
Sure. It's almost like a coda at the end, but it's still impactful unto itself.
Yeah, because you mentioned something. I'm like, I'm not going to even discuss that because we'll be here all night just discussing
But yeah,
games.
but perhaps that is evidence of why you can give it a very strong 1
Yeah.
on the themes.
Well, that said, let's move on to antagonists with Scott.
People. I'll tell you, ostensibly, you led to believe, on the surface, the bandit is because, yes, he commits some reprehensible acts, for sure, and even admits to it. He's almost, somewhat unrepentant. But then you see from some version, oh no, he begs forgiveness from the woman, So, again, it's each person's perception of reality. So, I don't think I can point to any one character for sure, to say, oh, that one's the antagonist. I think it's more of and I haven't done this in a while, but I think I'll bring back to it that it's a more nebulous, ethereal concept.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a corporeal thing in this film. And you can almost maybe say everyone's at fault to some degree, or everyone's antagoning everyone else. It's again, a tragic situation that happens almost sort of randomly to an extent. And yeah, and everyone's somewhat at fault, or everyone's deceiving or trying to hide something for whatever the motivation for that may be. But I think that's again, it sort of flows from themes into this, I would say. And yeah, I think it's very effective because it's hard to grasp hold of. It's hard to again, put your finger on okay, this, that, and the other thing where the obvious antagonistic elements and forces in this one. So yeah, while it might be a bit slippery, if you will, to pin down, I still think that again is a credit to the film that it does that with its characters and with its setup and so forth.
Well, yeah. Well, I'll say I think everyone in this film is shitty except for maybe the priest and the baby. But in terms of antagonists, right? The bandit Takamaro has to be the worst character in this, right? He
yes, I will grant you that
fucking attacks
for sure.
a couple on their way through the woods and rapes a woman and then kills a man, probably.
He did one or both of those things.
Yes, he did at least one.
Yeah.
Probably both of those things. So he is the worst character of all of them, morally, I would say. That doesn't necessarily make him the sole antagonist, I don't think. The problem is that everyone kind of sucks. But I gotta put the blame on Takamaro for this one. He
Fair enough.
definitely catalyzes every bad thing that happens in this movie.
And it's a fair point. I don't begrudge you that either. I think you can extend it further, but yeah, if you want to point to a corporeal character, then yes, absolutely.
I'm not sure that anyone is going to be a protagonist. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I think that kind of everyone is an interesting character, and perhaps they all run the gamut of antagonist to protagonist at certain points throughout this movie, at least the 4 or the 3 main characters. But I don't think you're supposed to like anybody. which is a shame. I feel like the woman gets a lot of blame out of fucking nowhere in the middle of this movie.
No, that's fair.
I mean,
Yeah,
I guess
was gonna say.
I guess it's just the
Period of time?
the culture or
Yeah.
whatever. The nature of what
certainly
was going on.
that's an
from the
element
culture.
aspect to it as to why it comes off that way, Steve. Oh yeah.
But of course, it's like, what the fuck, man. Now that being said, she still like really fucking sucks a lot of the time. Like in her begging for the guy to be killed, and like in a lot of the stories, or in a couple of stories, and
some
there's
versions.
just, I don't know. There's a lot of gray area, and I kind of like that about this. I think I'm going to give antagonist a fairly strong 1.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yep.
I don't know what I'm going to do for protagonist in a minute, but we'll see when
I got an idea.
I
on
got
that
some
one,
help for you, but yeah, I think I'm giving antagonist a 1 because of that very thing. Like it's a very like it's subtle but not subtle as well, as you pointed out. So
Yeah.
in that sense, I think it's quite effective, and again, it lends itself to discussion quite a bit. So
Yeah.
and if a film does, or any story does that, then I think you got to give it credit.
All right.
So Speaking
I guess
of-
we will go on to protagonist.
Yes.
That's going to be
you
me, and so the lady's name is Masako. The samurai's name is Takiro, and I guess they are the two prime suspects for protagonists. But I don't know if I like either one of them as a protagonist. Perhaps another option would be like the priest or the woodcutter, who are kind of the frame of the story. But they don't really do anything in the actual story.
You just answered your own question. They're the framework, but they're not central characters to it.
Right.
They're sort of like ancillary, or like they're sort of after the fact characters. So allow me to present my case.
Sure.
I'm looking at a 0 because nobody's the protagonist. Like that's kind of the whole point. I'm actually gonna probably lump them all as secondary characters because they're all like a framework. Because again, this is it's more of a philosophical work, as we talked out just now, right? So like these characters are like it's difficult to explain without having seen the movie. Even if you have seen it, I'm trying to make my case to you guys is that it's not the point of them. The point of it is not to have them as like your traditional protagonistic characters,
Right.
right? They're just there as sort of like not I don't even say like mouthpieces for a philosophy or this and that, but it's more just like it's an exploration of such, but you don't follow any of their stories. Like the story of the encounter is almost like the protagonist itself and not the characters themselves per se.
Yeah, I was going to say to have a central protagonist would kind of undo the entire story. I mean, you're right about the woodcutter. I mean, I was going to say the thing about the argument that the woodcutter and the priest were the framing devices, but the woodcutter was the first to give his testimony, and his testimony was
No, he wasn't.
Yes, he was.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, and it
that's
was
true,
nonsense. You remember he's like the
you're
samurai's
right,
like
yeah.
lit up with
Yeah.
like 15 arrows and, shit.
And he found the things. He found the woman's hat, and then he found the
It's not the evidence, sure. I
yeah,
guess.
he
You're
found
right,
the.
you're right.
What I'm saying is he found the 4 pieces of evidence, and each story you kind of figure out where those 4 pieces fall into. And then he's the one who tells his account that he was a witness. Turns out that the knife that keeps coming up, he was the one who stole it, and it ends with him in some weird redemption kind of thing. So I was going to say, if we're going to count one protagonist, I was going to say it's him, but he really is more of his confession at the end comes from going over this whole thing. So he to me would be the closest protagonist, but I agree with you that like this might be a softer 0 for me. But I definitely think that if there were a stronger protagonist, then it would kind of negate the rest of the movie.
I think they're all devices, and that's sort of like the point again of it. So
That's interesting. The woodcutter is really the only character with an arc of any kind.
kind of, I guess,
in
true
this.
versus everyone else, I suppose.
Well, yeah, at least from start to finish, right? Like he starts telling one story and he ends telling his real story, and then he gets the baby. So he has like that kind of redemption arc. However, that has nothing to do with the central story to this. So another strange thing. Yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to go with the 0 for protagonist, but that is something that is an interesting.
And I think it's on
look
purpose,
at
like,
things.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, like at the end there.
He is the only one with an arc, but does that make him a protagonist? And it really is, in a way, he's lamenting about the crime, but he's also lamenting about the fact that he didn't open his mouth because he did witness it, but he did take a piece of evidence from the scene because he had to feed his family of 6, supposedly. So allegedly, and
then he took another kid. I feel like he just sold that kid.
He took another kid.
Everybody's a piece of shit in this movie.
But the priest also was losing his faith in man, lost his faith with the one person, the woodcutter he thought he was had a bond with, and then once the woodcutter restores the priest's faith in man because he took this baby, and they are the frame of it. The meat of the story is the meat of the movie is like each person's account of this story, and that kind of provided the faith versus frailty, so to speak.
Yeah.
My whole point is like, I agree with Scott that,
So do you think the woodcutter is a supporting character?
Yes.
Would you say?
I say yes for sure.
If anything, I'd say yeah, unless we were going to say like, I don't even say he's like a Greek chorus or anything.
Well,
they did keep coming back to him between each story.
I wouldn't call him a Greek chorus, but mostly because, he's Japanese.
No, he wouldn't.
But let's move on to supporting. And Chris,
speaking of,
why don't you take us there?
Okay, well, pretty much as you said, everybody in the story is a secondary character.
At least that's my interpretation argument.
Right.
Other than the antagonists.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to protagonists. I'm still dwelling on this, but basically, I thought all the characters were great. Whether or not you like the characters or not, as human beings, as characters, they're all fantastic. They're all the people who played these characters were also awesome. I thought especially the one of the jarring things for me was the woman who played the medium. And as I said to the guy as precast, this woman goes to show you that in a demonic possession film, you don't need makeup and you don't need over a lot of makeup or contacts or anything.
It's not a demonic possession film.
No, but she was. Sure,
but I get what you mean.
No, but she was basically speaking from the for the murdered husband, and she was kind of a little manic during it. It was like it was very jarring. She kind of scared the shit out of me. But she was good. But what I'm saying is that is an example of you taking something very, very small, a very small part where she's not even speaking in her own voice and making a lot out of it. I mean, I just, the bandit whose name I'm blocking, well, because I can't really read my notes.
Tajimo.
Yeah.
I'm horrible with foreign pronunciations.
Yeah.
Takamura.
Takamura. Obviously, he was both a rogue and a chicken shit and a horrible person, who is but like I said, as characters, I liked all these people, and I won't really go on any more than I did, but I'm going to give this a very strong one.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I lump every character into the secondary category because I think like the point of this, or like the intention of the story. Like, yes, they're all well fleshed out characters, but none of them is like, and I'm actually going to mention this to you just before Steve, like, who has the most agency? Almost nobody. Like, it's a flashback story anyway. It's you're being told the stuff after the fact, regardless, right? So
yeah, sure.
Nobody's like affecting it.
Either the woodcutter or the priest.
You might say that, but again, I feel like they're just like, not necessarily, again, like I said, mouthpieces or anything like that, but they're more closely to something like that than protagonists unto themselves, which is why I lump them into secondary. And yes, they're all interesting, well-done characters. All the actors did a good job portraying them. They all had dynamics to them, for sure. It's just that they're not the main focal point, or like not, quote-unquote, the star of the story, of the plot. So yeah, they're all very well done. And there's not even that many. It's like 6, 7, like, total handful anyways. Yeah. And I count them like again, thinking more about it and talking it out, I count them all as secondary. And yes, they're all getting a very strong 1 collectively because of the fact that we just are, again, I argued for a default 0 in the protagonist category, thus making them all fall under secondary.
Secondary gets a 2.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I agree. You have, I guess, the 3 main characters. I'm not counting them in terms of like supporting, right? It's like the 3 characters that are in the story that is told and retold and retold. But you have the commoner, who
he's almost like
story.
Comedic relief, like kind of, or at least the most of that in this nature of this.
You have the who's the freaking I guess so. Like the commoner is like the guy that passes by and comes in from the rain. You have the woodcutter, who tells his side of the story that I guess he has seen from the woods. He never wanted to get involved, right?
Nope.
So like that's man, I do love his whole arc, right? He's like goes from being the guy who didn't want to get involved to the guy who takes
responsibility, sure.
The abandoned child and like gets involved with humanity. He's the reason why the priest sees light in humanity again, all that stuff. So you have that little like side story there that's pretty good. And you know, that's most of it. I guess you could almost count like the judge or the jury or whatever, whoever's asking questions as like a side character.
They're off camera.
Yeah, off camera the whole time.
You never heard them.
Yeah, exactly.
It's more like implied. Like,
but you know who they were and what questions they were asking through the characters that were answering them. And yeah, I mean, like it was the characters were all good, like well done, decently fleshed out, things like that. So I can't take away points from it on supporting. I think that, and especially on the strength of the woodcutter, I'm going to give it a 1.
Very nice.
And that is going to take us to Blue Dialogue with Scott.
With me, yeah. This one's a bit tough, like, and like, yeah, we're continuing our foreign odyssey, if you will. So it's a Japanese film that's dubbed, obviously, in English, or subtitled. And so when this arises, it's going to depend a little bit on the translation. So it wasn't bad. It wasn't like as flat and distilted that's maybe to a degree that some of the other stuff that we've caught this season so far has been. So like I might just be looking at a default 1. Like it was fine. It wasn't like necessarily standout, but there was a pretty like there's some good lines here and there's some good exchanges. It wasn't like the most flowery thing ever, and like again, that may be just by nature of being a translation. So I certainly don't think it was bad. Like it all made sense, and like especially when you're given one detail in a testimony and then it's contradicted elsewhere, and that's fine. There was again like a couple of like philosophical exchanges and lines that I thought were pretty good. So just overall, it's decent to good. Not great, not amazing, but certainly not terrible or like mishandled, or I don't think in any way. So I don't have much to say about it. It's just that just by nature of it being non-American, so like we have to deal with it in that way. But I think in this instance, it's perfectly serviceable, perfectly fine, and I don't really have any complaints about it overall.
This is definitely a theatrical piece. But yes. I mean, it's a play.
Yes, exactly. Well, yeah. Well said.
I mean, so in other words, the fact that we're talking about it the way we are, definitely hinges a lot. Speaks to the dialogue. I mean, if the dialogue were not as,
I suppose that's a very good point. Yeah.
Nuanced. It doesn't have to be. It can be very simply nuanced. But if it weren't nuanced, and this thing would have fallen on its face. It
doesn't have to be flashy. Yeah.
Yeah, this thing would have fallen on its face. So yeah, I'm going to definitely give the dialogue a 1, and that is because by the nature of what we are watching, the way it was done, the dialogue does carry a lot of the story and has to.
Yeah. I got to say, I didn't love the dialogue in this, but I did really enjoy the parts that they got into philosophical discussions and started talking about stuff.
Yeah,
like
I think some of that
like,
stuff is like the crux of it. And
by dint of that, I'm gonna give dialogue a 1. It's not, for any the dialogue felt a little I don't want to say stilted because that part could be at times I felt like it did, but that part could be the sub, but like I thought that there were parts of it that were like simplified or felt very like of their time, which is fine if it's really well done, but not like really my cup of tea usually, like that type of thing. So like whatever, but the philosophical discussions about the nature of man were interesting at least, and I will give it kind of a soft 1 for that, but a 1 nonetheless.
Yeah, exactly. Like I don't think it was any way like weak or mishandled to give it a 0, so I'm pretty much in the same boat. That's kind of basically what I was saying as well.
Right. So I'm going to move on to probably my favorite part of this film, which is the style. It was just really interesting film to watch visually and aurally. The sound design was really good, and the music was really good. I'll let you talk a little bit more about that, Chris. But I really loved like just having the framework set in like this destroyed temple was really cool. And like played
I believe the temple is the titular
Rashomon, and played into the themes. Yeah. And the rain coming down was well done, and that also played into the themes. And just some of the shots that they got in this, and the way that light was used was really, really kind of like
it was very striking,
inspired. I want to say, in terms of like using all of the tools that Kurosawa had to make this film. I thought that it's a lot of stuff that you have seen since, tricks.
I mean, it's hugely influential
like
in
things
terms of
that you've seen since then, and for a good reason, because it's like very fucking cool the shit that he was able to do with, the equipment that he had. So I'm gonna give style probably the strongest one of the film, and I'll turn it over to you guys now.
I don't really. It's a very striking film. This film is definitely the sum of its parts, and it works as a whole. Steve-O and I both agreed I think we all agreed the music was great.
I believe it was a famous composer around that time in Japan, but I'm not 100% sure.
Apparently, I didn't get a chance to do a lot of research on him, but he was a Japanese classical composer, Fumio Hoyasake. He lived a very short life. He died at 41. I didn't get to the part where I was actually looking up his works, but the music does add an awful lot. His use of light, as you said, the sound design was just great.
Yes.
I loved the court, for lack of a better term, the courtroom things, because you did not hear the jury or the judge. They just spoke to him, and it was very sparse what was going on. And in every case, no matter who was speak, the woodcutter and the priest were in every courtroom scene.
In the background,
whether they're giving their statements or evidence, nobody else was, which I thought was interesting. Which in a way it keeps getting me back to whether or not the woodcutters protagonist are there, because they're always but because they weren't witnesses to the meat of what happened. But it reminded me a lot.
Well, the woodcutter was anyway.
Well, that's true. So I don't know but it reminded me a lot of parts of Frankenheimer's Manchurian Candidate. The way the courtroom was shot, it reminded me of a couple scenes in that. So yeah, I don't really have much more to add. It's just I thought the style was fabulous. So it's getting a very strong one from me as well.
Yeah, I mean, you guys covered a lot of it, and yes, I would say alongside themes, style is probably like the most standout part of Rashomon. And yeah, you can see its influence like even now to this day on many films, and like you said, what he achieved with what he had at the time, and like some of the really cool effects that they used, like to get some awesome looking shots and tying into the story as well. So yes, I have to give Style a very, very strong one. Possibly, like I said, equal to Themes, but it is certainly one of the standout elements to the film.
I just want to mention, there was a certain, I think it was the, maybe the woman's story. I forget. It was one of the stories where it struck me as very like Hitchcocky and
some of the shadow
probably
work.
Hitchcocky before Hitchcock did anything that I saw of his. I think he started working around this time, but most of the stuff was later on. Most of the stuff that I know was later on. Anyway.
Right.
But yeah, like he had that kind of like Hitchcock feel. So I'm guessing I'm feeling like Hitchcock was swayed by kind of what Kurosawa was doing, and the main theme. This is another thing I wanted to mention. The main theme that like runs throughout this whole movie felt or sounded very much like Bolero, which
a little bit. You pointed it out to me. I was like, yeah, sure, I can hear it.
You and I listened to a bunch because of
Legion.
Because of the first season of Legion. So like, it all kind of ties into itself. It's a snake that eats its own head.
No, we're both, but yeah, definitely strong one on Style.
Yeah.
Overall.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so that's ones all around for Style, and let's move on to a recommendation with Chris.
I wholeheartedly recommend this. I really love this movie. The more we talk about it, the more I love it, and the more I'm looking forward to seeing it. Beth was just like, I definitely want to see it. Wasn't in the mood. She was in the mood to see it tonight. I'm like, don't worry about it. I'm probably going to want to watch it again. I definitely want to watch it again. And at least this way, next time I watch it, I know the things based upon our discussion that I want to look for and things that have me thinking about it. So yeah, I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend this. If you're into film, it's a really important film. And I mean that very unpretentiously, but it really is.
Sure. That's what I was going to say.
but from my heart, I think it's a great movie. I loved it. So it's a very strong one for me.
Yeah, I mean, I basically piggyback on that. Like I said, like, it's just funny that I legit forgot that I'd seen this film. And the second I saw like screenshots and like was doing my pre-research, I'm like, oh shit, I totally did see it. And yes, it is very influential for a reason. There's a reason they showed it to me in film class, obviously. It's just that I'm an idiot and forgot about it. But no, it certainly is a film to study and learn something from. And you, like I said, you could certainly see sort of its ripples to this day in a number of things. And yeah, I highly recommend it as well. It's fairly easily available. It's also about an hour and a half, so again, fairly easily to consume. And yes, it's a damn good film to see. And like I said, and as we just have done, it generates some very interesting discussions about like what you can extract from it. So
yeah, I am. So I think that this is an important film in the history of film. And if you are a student of movies, or if you are interested in movies and where they came from and where a lot of things from current, even up to modern day films came from, you're going to see this movie referenced and
for sure.
homaged all over the damn place. And like, I can't believe it's taken me this long to see it.
Yeah, seriously.
I mean, there's a term, the Rashomon effect, like that was coined because of it.
Yeah. That said, I think I'm going to give this recommend overall, but in terms of a lot of this stuff, I think a lot of it's been done better at this point.
Maybe, but it had to have come from somewhere, for sure.
But it did, like, this movie birthed so many things in terms of, the people that wanted to come after and make films. And I know Kurosawa is a big influence on pretty much fucking everybody who makes films worldwide.
Sure.
He's not like, he's not like just a big Japanese influence. He's a big influence on American films and European films. And, like anybody who makes movies watches this guy's movies, and it's for a reason, So in that regard, I think if you are interested in film, you'll like this movie. If you're just looking for like a blockbuster to kill some time, this ain't your movie.
It's not a lighthearted like let's just sit back and relax and watch a movie. Like it's not quite that, but it's still an enjoyable film if you're if in the vein of what you said, if that's what you're looking for.
But it is something to be seen. It's like one of those movies you should see before you die. So I guess in that respect, I will recommend it.
Agreed.
So yeah, I think that's everything.
what is-
Anybody else have anything else to add?
No, not quite. Like I think we said what we said, and like it generates, like I said, interesting outcomes that you can discuss about. And I think that's probably like it's alongside again its actual composition. That's its legacy, and I think that totally stands.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think we're all giving it an 8, and I think
Is that correct? I was going to ask you for the scores.
Yep. Well, it's an 8 all around and 8
I was
overall.
really happy that I remembered it. 'Cause
Very
usually
nice.
I'm the first one to forget.
I did not write
to
any of
say
that
it.
shit down, so like yeah,
Well, usually when I'm hosting, I'm like, okay, ready? I'm like, no, you want to go to the scores?
I hear you. So yeah, I mean, 8's very
Yeah,
strong.
that's-
Like
yeah.
you know, it might garner like a higher like arbitrary number outside of it, but on our scale, that's still a very
Yeah.
damn respectable score, and I think it very well deserved it.
Yeah, I agree. It
earned it.
It's a good flick, and yeah, it's gonna be our last word on Rashomon.
Yep.
So I will talk to you later. We're gonna close out. I have been your host, Steve Ramosi, joined here tonight by Chris Morgan
Good night. I'm going to go have a hakushu.
and Scott Thurlow.
And I'm gonna go commit seppuku. See you next time.
Editing and engineering by Stephen Hermosi. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates. Or mods?